Over to you, Selena.
It's great to be here at the Earth-Based Spirituality Action Team of the Citizens Climate Lobby. It's great to be back. And tonight I'm going to share some information and perspectives about greening the end of life. In particular, green burial and green cemeteries. I'm Senior Minister of Circle Sanctuary, which is celebrating its 50th anniversary in this year, 2024. We serve nature religion practitioners of many paths across the US and in countries around the world. We started in 1974, and one of the things that is part of Circle Sanctuary's activities is our green cemetery. We founded one of the first green cemeteries in North America back in 1995, and we expanded our cemetery to have an option of full body burials back in 2010 and became the first green cemetery to do full body burials in Wisconsin back then. And since that time, we've been very involved in doing education, not only with the general public, but specifically with people in the funeral industry to talk about the importance of greening the end of life. So, what is green burial? Green burial is also known as natural burial. And when did it start? The idea of having an unembalmed body in a biodegradable container returned to the land is something very ancient. We know humans have been doing natural burial since the Stone Age. Green burial is a term that's been in use in more recent years where there's intentional adoption of this ancient burial practice with environmental preservation in mind. There are several types of green cemeteries. Green burials might happen at a hybrid cemetery, which is a cemetery that has vaults, steel caskets, and other forms of burial that are very commonplace in many parts of the world, but actually use a lot of resources, having concrete or fiberglass vaults, having steel and other types of caskets that are meant to last for a really long time and not biodegrade, and then having some standard ways of maintaining the cemetery, often with fertilized with chemical lawn. That's what many people think of when they think about a cemetery. But when you look more historically, you will understand that actually people have been burying the bodies of their loved ones in natural places much longer. A hybrid cemetery has a section in a cemetery that has vaults and long lasting caskets. And some people choose to be buried in the in that part of the cemetery instead of going with the cement vault and the metal caskets. So that is an option. Many people prefer to have an actual um, natural burying area, and Circle Sanctuary is in that category. And here, the bodies are unembalmed, and all the containers are biodegradable, and the bodies and the containers go directly into the earth with ceremony. There's also a kind of natural burial cemetery that includes conservation and land trust work. Circle Sanctuary doesn't neatly fit into the natural burial cemetery or the conservation land trust. We are a spiritual and religious cemetery that's green, and we have practices that are part of Circle Cemetery that are different than what many green cemeteries permit. We want the body to be unembalmed. We want the container that the body is in to be unembalmed, but we invite people to put in non-toxic grave goods. That's a very ancient pagan practice. It, goes back to paleo-pagan times. We also encourage people to consider what kind of marker, if any, they want for the grave site. Some green cemeteries only permit um, biodegradable markers, but we have granite markers that are made to last a really long time, and they aren't from indigenous stone. So that's another reason we don't neatly fit into any of the Green Burial Council's, um, I guess, types of cemeteries. We also do ecological restoration. That's different than just preserving green space. We actively have volunteers connected with Circle Sanctuary, the pagan church, and our pagan church cemetery get rid of invasive species. We have environmental scientists that are basically advising us on land management practices. Why do people want green burial? I'd say there are several reasons. Certainly with this group, environmental would most likely be number one. It's a greener way of having human remains after one is done with life return to nature. Here, you have a much lower carbon footprint than other forms of deposition of final remains, as it's sometimes known. And there's something really powerful about combining intentional preservation of green space with the return of human remains to nature. Some people choose green burial for economic reasons. Without the cost of embalming a body, without the very big expense of metal and special wood caskets with special glues and finishes and all sorts of other parts that are a choice for some people in the funeral industry. And without having a concrete or fiberglass vault, already there is savings. I mean, in some places in the United States, there's a good relationship between green cemeteries and other types of cemeteries in the funeral industry. Wisconsin is one of those places, and there are some other places where there's less than optimal understanding and collaboration. In New York, for example, New York State, I was reading earlier today about a town that was trying to prevent a green cemetery from being created. And there also are some reports where some people have, in the funeral industry and even connected with some religious forms, really are opposed to green cemeteries. But the good news is more and more people are understanding not only green burial, but green cemeteries and making it a choice. So economically, green burials and not only the process, but whatever the cost is for a plot in a green cemetery or a right to bury in a green cemetery tend to be much lower than other types of cemeteries. The third reason some people will choose green burial in a green cemetery has to do with culture, spirituality, religion, philosophy. Um, there's some parts of Judaism, the Baha'i faith, some Native American traditional ways, some Islamic ways, and some pagan ways where unembalming, having bodies that are unbombed is basically preferred and considered the best way to go. And for that reason, some cemeteries that have been using the liners and other things for years may have already had some contact with one or more religions or cultures that do unembalmed bodies in biodegradable containers. So chances are there may be more hybrid cemeteries than most people realize. Um, and I also would like to share with you, I guess, the advantages of green burial and green cemeteries over other types of cemeteries and burials. I really think that the idea of having one's remains returned to nature is very powerful. And with green burial at green cemeteries, very often it's more common than not, in addition to having people accompany the body to the gravesite, those who are attending the burial actually have an opportunity to participate in the burial. And the very first green burial we did at Circle Cemetery, it was a funeral home did help with the transport of the body. So, and this was their first time doing a green burial at a green cemetery. And the funeral director and assistant were expecting, I guess they weren't sure what to expect, but they were expecting that um, people would be around the grave, there'd be prayers and other things said, and that the body in the container would be lowered down, and then there might be some token filling in of the soil. What they didn't expect was that, and there were dozens and dozens of people at that burial, and many of the people weren't really dressed to do a green burial. They were in heels and suits and things, but essentially everybody got involved in filling in the grave and continued until the grave was completely filled in. So, in working with that funeral home, I can tell you that was so transformative that they now advertise doing green cemetery work and green burial work. Um, I think the whole direct participation in returning a loved one's remains to the earth is just really, really powerful. I want to say a few things before I take some questions about other forms of green burial or natural burial. There's debate about the greenness of cremation. Some people choose cremation because ashes can be scattered and therefore not taking up a particular piece of land. And in that way, some people are considering cremation and the cremain scattering as a kind of green burial or burying the ashes in the ground. Other people have concerns about the amount of fuel that it takes to heat up the body to do the actual cremation process and what chemicals might be released in the air. There's quite a bit of debate about cremation. But at Circle Cemetery, we made the choice to not only have full body green burials, but originally we began with cremation, cremains being able to be scattered at our cemetery or buried at our cemetery. And we continue to have both those choices as options. I'm hoping Wisconsin will join the states that are permitting human composting. There's actually a number of companies that have been working on this. The first one was in Seattle, Washington, and there's actually a process. It takes 6 weeks to 2 months for a body to naturally break down in the system that they're using. And there, instead of ashes going into the ground or a full body going into the ground, it's a process that brings about soil that can be used in the garden and in other places. So some people are starting to request um, human composting. There's also some forms of working with biodegradable chemicals to break down the body. And there's continuing to be explorations of other ways of returning the body to nature. Now, sky burial, where you aren't actually putting the body in the ground, but you're exposing it either up on a platform, as is done in some parts of Asia, um, that is still done according to some religious and cultural traditions, but in some places in the world, it actually has stopped being done because chemicals in the human body have been making the vultures and other creatures that feast on the body sick. So in some places, that practice, which is very old, has shifted. There's also sea burial, where the body or ashes are put out into the ocean. So when it comes to natural burial, the main thing I'm focusing on tonight is full body burial and ashes burial in green cemeteries, but there are these other aspects as well. If you're going to be choosing green burial, it's good to think through um, your plans and to write this down and have at least one person in charge of carrying out your wishes, and ideally a backup to that person, so that if the person you've chosen to implement your wishes is unavailable or passes away before you, that there is a backup to it. And things to keep in mind are, what kind of container do I want my body in? What kind of ceremony might I want? Do I want this done with a home funeral or a graveside funeral or a funeral at a funeral home? Is a funeral home going to be involved, or am I going to work with a death midwife to help with home funerals and transport of body and other things? So those are some other things to consider in planning. Who gets told? When do they get told? And who's going to facilitate the green burial process? What kind of container will the body go in if it's full body burial? Will it be a cardboard cremation box that will serve as a container, or a wooden casket, or a wooden coffin, or a wicker basket or coffin? An ecopod, that's now becoming a choice, or what many people are tending to use these days are shrouds of linen or of wool. So thinking through choices regarding that. And what cemetery are you going to be buried at? So um, think about, do you want a hybrid cemetery? Do you want a fully green cemetery? Do you want a cemetery that's connected with the land trust? What's the security around the cemetery? What is your access? Um, are markers permitted? And if so, Are there regulations around what kind of markers can be used, or are markers forbidden? So those are some of the things to keep in mind as you think about a green burial at a green cemetery for yourself or for a loved one. I can't emphasize enough the importance of writing it down, having several people in the loop about your wishes, and also communicating all of this to your next of kin, and making sure people are aware of it in advance. Ideally, you make the arrangements in advance for all of this. So we have time for a few questions. And thank you all for being here tonight and hearing my latest, I guess, sharings about greeting the end of life.
Okay, so if you have a question, you could either, raise your virtual hand or your real physical hand, and I will call you. And if not, I'm sure I can always come up with, I always have one in my brain, but I always want to give people because we have about 8 minutes. So if you have anything, okay, I don't see anything right now. So, oh, I do. Alex, go for it.
Yeah, thank you for the talk, Selena. That's much appreciated. Do people come from out of state and all over the country to be buried at your cemetery, or is it just locals to your state?
Right now, all of our full body burials have had a Wisconsin connection. One person who really wanted to be buried in our cemetery was in Minnesota, but we were able to arrange for a funeral home that had the ability to work with more than Wisconsin, worked with Minnesota and Wisconsin. For cremains, we have a national pagan cemetery. We have people from all across the USA. And one reason some people have chosen cremation, even though it takes quite a bit more fuel to create the cremains, is that it is possible to have ashes go in multiple locations. And some people have chosen to have their ashes on our restored prairie and nurture those plants. Some have chosen to have them buried, and some both.
And I just want to make a real quick comment for anybody that does have access to human composting, at least the one that I checked out, and they may vary, is because it's soil, it's another thing that you can have in multiple locations. So for those people that's a consideration, like you want to have several people have access to that, it's an option. Okay, I see. I'm going to Dean, why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
Thanks for taking my question. Nice to see you, Selena, and I enjoyed the talk.
Again, yay!
I have a question about the legality, if you know anything about the legality as far as transporting bodies. I mean, if you're taking care of your loved one's body after death, are there legal things that you need to be aware of as far as how soon the body has to be buried, how the body is transported from the home to the cemetery or um, wherever it ends up? I mean, can anybody transport a dead body without a legal problem?
If you're part of the family, if you're next of kin, you have special consideration there. And so a good source for and I will say some of the laws regarding body transport and other things having to do with cemeteries and in the life processes are continuing to evolve. And as more green burial and green cemetery information is out in the larger area, more people are wanting this. So my understanding is from people involved in the home funeral work that the family is able to transport the body, but it really is a good idea to have some resource person, and it could be a death midwife, a doula, that would, or people who are in the funeral industry that are embracing the green alternative. They should have the most current information about the laws. Um, and I think many people think there's some regulation after a person dies. If a person dies in the home, that you only have a certain amount of time to get the body out or whatever. Well, if you have a form of refrigeration and packets of dry ice are being used with people doing the home funerals, that really can keep the body um, cool for a period of time. Of course, you have to see what the season is and where you are geographically about that. In Wisconsin and other places in the northern climes, it's been a practice long ago during the winter. Bodies were stored in an outbuilding until the spring thaw, right? So that's an important consideration, is preserving the body. Most green burials that are happening right after death happen within 4 days. And there are now more funeral homes and other facilities that have refrigeration short term that can facilitate situations where people might need a week or two to have family and friends gather. But that's a good question.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's a lot more options that people know. Like, for example, you always have to check your state, but my understanding is in almost every state, if you own property, you are allowed to, bury the body. Now, you have to always think about health considerations and things like that. Now, and there's also property, value, but there's nothing illegal about doing it. At least in most states that I know of. I haven't checked every 51 of them, but I've checked a lot of them.
Well, and there's now a number of green cemetery directories that are available online and in print, and they continue to get updated. And I'm really excited by the fact that there's a lot more green cemeteries and cemeteries with green sections than there were even 5 years ago.
And I
And
believe somebody that's doing something where you can have the body, they will actually like make a tree out of it. I remember seeing something about that, so there is more and more options are coming across, which I'm also really excited about. I think more options, the better, that are healthier for the earth and also reflect a lot of the ways a lot of us feel.
well, and I think one of the powerful things about green cemeteries, yes, they're the final resting place for the remains of loved ones, but part of the philosophy of green cemeteries is preserving that green space. They're places of life. Part of the reason Circle Sanctuary actually has the granite markers rather than markers of wood or no markers at all that you have to use GPS is that we've found that people find it helpful with their grieving and memorial process, especially since it's a pagan cemetery. At Samhain, people know where to go and put offerings around it. We don't have people plant vegetation at the graves, certain flowers and things. We're trying to keep the ecosystem around consistent. But being able to go to a grave and know where it is, yeah, that has been really therapeutic with people. And
And with that, unfortunately, our time is up. It always goes too fast, but I just want to quickly thank the lovely Selena Fox for her time. And also, I want to invite everyone to come back. We do this every month. It's always the second Monday, same time, same Zoom location. We also record them on YouTube. Next time, we're going to have somebody talking about a very important subject, climate anxiety. A lot of us feel anxious because of what's going on. And how do we deal with that? So I want to invite you back for that amazing topic. Thank you all again. And for everything you do, thank you. I always like to say this because it's true. There is no such thing as a small act. Every act matters. So whatever you're doing for eco activism, thank you so much.
Thank you,
green
Selena.
blessings.
Thank you, everyone.